Sophia lived a modest and peaceful life with her father, David. They ran a small bookstore in the heart of their quaint town, and while money was often tight, they found joy in their simple existence. Sophia cherished her father deeply. He had been her only family since her mother passed away when she was a child. One evening, Sophia noticed something was wrong the moment her father stepped through the door. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as he set down his briefcase. "Dad, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost," Sophia said, rushing to his side. David's shoulders slumped as he sat at the kitchen table, burying his face in his hands. "Sophia, I've made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia's stomach tightened with dread. "What do you mean? What's going on?" David sighed heavily, and for the first time, he looked her in the eyes, guilt and fear etched in every line of his face. "I borrowed money years ago from an old friend of mine. I thought I could pay it back, but the debt has grown, and now we're drowning in it." Sophia's heart raced. "How much do you owe?" "$1 million, he replied, his voice cracking with the weight of the number. Sophia gasped, her mind reeling. $1 million was an unfathomable amount of money. They barely scraped by with the bookstore. How could he have kept this from her for so long? "Dad, how could you?" Before she could finish her sentence, the doorbell rang, interrupting the conversation. Sophia looked at her father, whose face had turned ghostly white. "Who is it?" "It's him," David whispered. Sophia opened the door to find a tall, impeccably dressed man standing on the porch. His dark hair was slicked back, and his piercing blue eyes held an air of authority. He exuded power and wealth. He introduced himself as Adrian Kingston, the son of Lucas Kingston, the man David had borrowed the money from. "I'm here to discuss your father's debt," Adrian said smoothly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Sophia stood frozen as Adrian and her father sat down at the kitchen table. "What do you want?" she finally asked, her voice shaking with fear. Adrian glanced at her, then fixed his cold gaze on David. "Your father owes my family a significant sum of money. The interest alone has doubled the original debt. We've discussed a way for him to pay it off." David bowed his head, unable to meet Sophia's eyes. "Sophia, I've made a deal with Adrian." Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. "What kind of deal?" David's voice cracked as he spoke. "In exchange for the debt being erased, I've agreed that you will marry Adrian." Sophia's world came crashing down. "What?" she exclaimed, her voice rising with disbelief. "You agreed to marry me off like some kind of property?" David couldn't bear to look at her. "Sophia, it's the only way. I'm sorry." Adrian's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Your father's right, Sophia. This marriage will settle the debt and secure his business. Think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement." Sophia was speechless, her mind spinning. She was being sold into marriage to pay off her father's mistakes, and the man sitting across from her, who she barely knew, was to become her husband. The days that followed were a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and resignation. No matter how much Sophia pleaded with her father to find another way, the reality remained the same. The bookstore would be lost, and their home would be taken if the debt wasn't paid. Her father's health was deteriorating from the stress, and Sophia couldn't bear to watch him suffer any longer. Adrian Kingston was relentless. He visited often, overseeing the arrangements for the wedding. His demeanor remained cold and professional, as if this marriage was nothing more than a business transaction. And to him, that's exactly what it was. Despite her protests, Sophia soon found herself trapped by the inevitable. The wedding day arrived faster than she could have imagined. She stood in front of the mirror in an opulent white gown that Adrian had chosen, staring at her reflection with a mixture of fear and sorrow. This wasn't the wedding she had dreamed of as a little girl. This was a contract, a binding agreement that tied her future to a man she hardly knew. Her father stood behind her, looking more fragile than ever. "Sophia, I'm so sorry for putting you in this position. I never wanted this for you." Sophia turned to face him, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "I know, Dad, but I'm doing this for you. For us." David's face crumpled with emotion as he pulled her into a tight hug. "You're stronger than I ever realized." The ceremony was a grand but joyless affair, held in a lavish ballroom filled with the wealthiest families in town. Sophia's heart felt heavy as she walked down the aisle toward Adrian, who stood waiting at the altar. He looked every bit the powerful businessman, calm, collected, and emotionless. She had never felt more alone in her life. As the officiant spoke the vows, Sophia's mind raced. Could she really go through with this? Could she spend the rest of her life tied to a man she didn't love? But when she looked out at her father, sitting in the front row with a hopeful, tearful expression, she knew the answer. She had no choice. "I do," she whispered, sealing her fate. Life after the wedding was nothing like Sophia had imagined. Adrian's sprawling mansion was a stark contrast to the cozy apartment she had shared with her father. The estate was cold and imposing, filled with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a constant buzz of staff who scurried about their duties without so much as a glance in her direction. Adrian had made it clear from the beginning. This was a marriage in name only. He had his business to attend to, and Sophia was expected to play the role of the perfect wife, silent, compliant, and invisible. He didn't force himself on her, for which she was grateful. They slept in separate rooms, and their interactions were minimal. Adrian was a man of few words, and the few conversations they had were strictly transactional. He was often away on business, leaving Sophia to wander the empty halls of the mansion, feeling more like a prisoner than a wife. Days turned into weeks, and the loneliness became suffocating. Sophia missed her old life, as simple and modest as it had been. She missed her father, the bookstore, the feeling of being in control of her own destiny. Here, in Adrian's world, she felt like she was drowning in wealth but starved for freedom. One evening, after a particularly long and lonely day, Sophia gathered the courage to confront Adrian. She found him in his study, surrounded by stacks of papers and business reports. "I can't keep living like this," she blurted out, her voice trembling with frustration. Adrian looked up from his work, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" This isn't a marriage. I feel like a stranger in my own life. I didn't marry you for money, Adrian. I married you because I had no choice. But I can't go on like this." Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her for a long moment. "What do you want from me, Sophia? You agreed to this arrangement. You knew what it was." "I want to feel like more than just a pawn in some business deal. I want to feel alive." For the first time, Adrian's gaze softened, though only slightly. He stood up and walked toward her, stopping just inches away. "I never wanted this for you either. I never wanted to marry someone out of obligation. But this is the reality we're both stuck in." His words, while not exactly comforting, carried a hint of understanding. "I'll try to make things easier for you," he said. "I can't promise love, but I can promise to treat you with respect." Sophia nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something. And in this cold, loveless marriage, even the smallest gesture of kindness felt like a lifeline. To fall into a rhythm, albeit an awkward one. Adrian was still distant, but he made more of an effort to include Sophia in his life. He began to invite her to social events, business dinners, and charity galas, where she was expected to smile and play the role of the perfect trophy wife. But beneath the polished surface, cracks were starting to form. Sophia could see glimpses of the man Adrian truly was. Beneath the cold exterior, there was someone who had been shaped by duty and expectation his entire life. He had been raised to believe that marriage was nothing more than a transaction, a way to consolidate power and wealth. It was during one of these charity galas that Sophia saw the first real sign of vulnerability in Adrian. As they stood on the balcony, looking out over the city skyline, Adrian let out a heavy sigh. "I've always done what was expected of me," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the noise of the party. "I've never had a choice. Not in my career, not in my relationships, not even in this marriage." Sophia turned to look at him, surprised by his sudden openness. "You don't have to keep living like this, Adrian. You can make your own choices." Adrian shook his head, a bitter smile playing on his lips. "It's not that simple. My family has built an empire, and I'm expected to keep it running. There's no room for personal feelings." Sophia placed a hand on his arm, feeling a surge of empathy for the man who had, in many ways, been just as trapped by his circumstances as she had. "Maybe it's time to make room." Adrian looked at her, his blue eyes searching hers for a long moment before he finally nodded. "Maybe." Slowly but surely, the walls between them began to crumble. Adrian, for all his wealth and power, had never known what it was like to have someone care for him without an agenda. And Sophia, despite her initial resentment toward him, began to see the man behind the CEO, someone who was just as lonely and lost as she was. They started spending more time together, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to know each other. Late-night conversations turned into shared meals, and before long, they were laughing together, sharing stories about their pasts, and finding comfort in each other's company. Sophia's heart began to soften toward Adrian, and she could tell he was feeling the same. He was no longer the cold, distant man she had married. He was warm, caring, and surprisingly vulnerable. The more time they spent together, the more they realized that their marriage didn't have to be a business arrangement. It could be something real. But just as they were beginning to fall for each other, a new obstacle emerged: Adrian's family. They had always seen Sophia as nothing more than a means to an end, a way to pay off a debt. But now that Adrian was starting to care for her, they saw her as a threat. Adrian's father, Lucas, was particularly unhappy with the way things were unfolding. He called a family meeting and demanded that Adrian end the marriage, claiming that Sophia was a distraction from his true responsibilities. Adrian, however, refused. "I'm not ending my marriage," he said firmly. "Sophia is my wife, and I care about her. This isn't just about business anymore." Lucas was furious, but Adrian stood his ground. For the first time in his life, he was making a decision based on what he wanted, not what was expected of him. Sophia, too, found herself fighting for their relationship. She had fallen in love with Adrian, and she wasn't going to let his family tear them apart. Together, they faced the opposition head-on, determined to build a future together. In the end, love won out. Adrian's family, though still wary of Sophia, eventually came to accept her. They realized that she wasn't a threat, but rather someone who had brought out the best in Adrian. And as for Adrian and Sophia, their love only grew stronger with each passing day. What had started as a cold, transactional marriage had blossomed into a partnership built on trust, respect, and love. They were no longer bound by duty, they were bound by choice. As the weeks went by, Adrian and Sophia's relationship continued to evolve. The coldness that once defined their marriage had thawed, replaced by a growing warmth between them. Adrian, who had once seen Sophia as nothing more than a business arrangement, now found himself seeking her company more often. He would join her for dinner, engage in deep conversations, and occasionally allow himself to be vulnerable in front of her, something he had never done with anyone before. Sophia, in turn, was beginning to see the man behind the impenetrable walls Adrian had built around himself. He wasn't just the ruthless businessman who had coerced her into marriage. He was also a man burdened by the weight of expectations, a man who had never been given the freedom to live on his own terms. One night, after a particularly long day at work, Adrian came home to find Sophia curled up on the couch, reading a book. She looked up and smiled, something that had become more common between them. "Rough day?" she asked, setting her book down. Adrian sighed as he loosened his tie and sat beside her. "You could say that." Sophia moved closer, sensing his tension. "Want to talk about it?" For a moment, Adrian hesitated. He had always dealt with his problems alone, but there was something about Sophia that made him want to open up. "It's my father. He wants me to expand the business, but I'm not sure it's the right move. He's always pushing for more, for bigger deals, more power." Sophia listened carefully, her brow furrowed. "What do you think is the right move?" Adrian leaned back, his expression pensive. "I don't know. I've spent my whole life doing what's expected of me. I've never had the luxury of asking myself what I really want." Sophia placed a hand on his arm, offering comfort. "Maybe it's time to start asking." Adrian looked at her, a flicker of something, hope, maybe, passing through his eyes. Maybe. As the months passed, Adrian and Sophia's bond deepened. They spent more time together, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They found comfort in the quiet moments, sharing breakfast in the mornings, going for walks in the garden, and spending evenings talking about everything from business to their childhoods. Sophia began to see a side of Adrian that few people ever did. He was thoughtful, caring, and surprisingly gentle when he let his guard down. She, in turn, felt herself falling for him, despite the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. But as their feelings for each other grew, so did the complexity of their situation. Sophia couldn't forget that their marriage had started as a transaction to pay off her father's debt. She wondered if Adrian's feelings for her were genuine, or if they were simply the result of convenience and proximity. One evening, as they sat together by the fireplace, Sophia finally mustered the courage to address the elephant in the room. "Adrian," she began, her voice quiet but steady, "do you ever regret marrying me?" Adrian looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "At first, yes, but now, no, I don't regret it." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "Why?" Adrian turned to face her, his eyes softening. "Because you've made me see things differently. You've shown me that there's more to life than business deals and power plays. You've made me realize that I can choose my own path, and that maybe, just maybe, I want to choose you." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she felt that maybe their marriage could be more than just an arrangement. Maybe it could be something real. Just when things between Adrian and Sophia seemed to be falling into place, trouble loomed on the horizon. Adrian's father, Lucas Kingston, had never been fully supportive of the marriage, and now, as Adrian began to prioritize Sophia over the business, Lucas became more vocal in his disapproval. One afternoon, while Adrian was at a business meeting, Lucas showed up at the house unannounced. His arrival immediately put Sophia on edge. She had never been comfortable around him, sensing the cold disdain he harbored for her. "Sophia," Lucas began, his tone icy as he stepped into the living room, "I've come to speak with you about Adrian." Sophia straightened, trying to maintain her composure. "What about Adrian?" Lucas didn't mince words. "You're becoming a distraction. Adrian is losing focus, and it's because of you. This marriage was supposed to be a business arrangement, nothing more. But now, he's starting to care for you, and that's a problem." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat, but forced herself to stay calm. Adrian isn't losing focus. He's just trying to find a balance between his personal life and the business. Lucas scoffed. "There is no balance in this family. The business comes first, always. And if you care about Adrian, you'll step aside and let him do what's necessary." Sophia's hands clenched at her sides. "I love Adrian. I'm not going anywhere." Lucas' eyes narrowed, his voice growing colder. "If you truly loved him, you'd leave before you ruin him." With that, he turned and left, leaving Sophia shaken and uncertain. She had fought so hard to build a relationship with Adrian, but now she feared that his family's disapproval could tear them apart. When Adrian returned home that evening, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Sophia was distant, her usual warmth replaced by a coldness that he couldn't quite understand. "What happened?" he asked, his concern evident. Sophia hesitated for a moment before telling him about Lucas' visit. "Your father thinks I'm a distraction. He wants me to leave you." Adrian's face darkened with anger. "He said that?" Sophia nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "He doesn't think I'm good enough for you. And maybe he's right. Maybe I'm just getting in the way of your life, your business." Adrian stepped forward, cupping her face in his hands. "Don't you ever say that. You're not a distraction, Sophia. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Sophia searched his eyes, looking for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was sincerity. Adrian, what if we can't make this work? Your family, they'll never accept me. Adrian's jaw tightened. Then we'll make them. I'm not going to let anyone come between us. Not my father, not the business, no one. His words were firm, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was far from over. The confrontation with Lucas had brought Adrian and Sophia closer than ever. For the first time, they were united in their fight to make their marriage work, not just for the sake of the business, but because they genuinely cared for each other. But the road ahead was still uncertain. Adrian's father continued to pressure him to focus on expanding the business, while Sophia struggled with the fear that she would never be truly accepted by Adrian's family. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony, looking out over the city skyline, Adrian took Sophia's hand in his. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice quiet but steady, "about us, about our future." Sophia looked at him, her heart racing. "What about it?" Adrian turned to face her, his expression serious. "I don't want to live like this anymore, constantly torn between the business and the people I care about. I want to build a life with you, Sophia, a real life, not one dictated by my family or my father's expectations." Sophia's eyes widened, her heart swelling with emotion. "Adrian, are you saying?" "I'm saying that I want us to start over, to build something new, together." Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she nodded, overwhelmed by the depth of Adrian's commitment. "I want that too." In that moment, they both knew that their love had transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. They were no longer bound by a debt, by duty, or by obligation. They were bound by love, and that was stronger than anything that could come between them. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it was theirs to shape. Adrian's declaration of wanting to start fresh with Sophia gave them both hope for a new beginning, but the looming presence of his father and the powerful Kingston family was still a constant shadow. Lucas was not someone who would back down easily, and as time went on, the tension between father and son only grew. One day, during a tense board meeting, Lucas made his move. He proposed an aggressive business expansion plan that would take Adrian away from home for several months. It was a clear attempt to pull Adrian away from Sophia and remind him of his responsibilities to the family business. Adrian, however, had already made up his mind. When Lucas presented the plan, Adrian stood up in the middle of the meeting. "I appreciate the work you've put into this proposal, but I'm not going to pursue this expansion." Lucas looked up, shocked. "Excuse me? I'm not going to let the business control my life anymore. I've spent years trying to live up to your expectations, but I'm done sacrificing my happiness and my marriage for the sake of profit." The board members exchanged surprised glances, while Lucas's face turned red with anger. "Adrian, you can't be serious. This is your legacy, your responsibility." Adrian met his father's gaze, unwavering. "My responsibility is to live my life on my own terms and to the people I care about. I love Sophia, and I'm not going to let this business take me away from her." Without another word, Adrian walked out of the meeting, leaving a stunned silence behind him. After the meeting, Adrian knew that his father wouldn't let things go easily. That evening, Lucas came to Adrian and Sophia's home, furious. "What do you think you're doing, Adrian?" Lucas demanded as soon as he walked through the door. "You're throwing away everything we've built for a girl who was never supposed to be anything more than a business deal." Adrian's face was calm, but his eyes were filled with determination. "I'm building something different, Dad, something that actually matters to me." Lucas turned to Sophia, his gaze cold. "You've turned him against his family, haven't you? You've poisoned him with your naive ideas about love and freedom." Sophia stood her ground, her voice steady but firm. "I haven't turned Adrian against anyone. He's made his own choices, just like you have." Lucas scoffed. "You think you can just walk into our family and change everything? This is a business, not some fairy tale. You don't belong in this world." Adrian stepped in front of Sophia, shielding her from his father's harsh words. "She belongs with me, and that's all that matters. You can either accept that, or we're done." For a moment, Lucas seemed genuinely taken aback. His son, The one who had always followed his orders was now standing against him. Finally, with a clenched jaw, Lucas spoke. "If you choose her over this family, don't expect to come back. The business, the estate, the Kingston name, it will all go to your brother. You'll be cut off." Adrian didn't hesitate. "If that's the price for living my life on my own terms, then so be it." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." With that, he turned and stormed out of the house, leaving Adrian and Sophia in a stunned silence. The days following Adrian's confrontation with his father were tense. True to his word, Lucas had begun the process of cutting Adrian out of the family business. Adrian, for the first time in his life, was no longer the heir to the Kingston Empire. It was a difficult adjustment, but one he had made willingly. Despite the challenges, Adrian found a sense of relief in his decision. For the first time, he felt free to make his own choices, to live his life without the constant pressure of living up to his family's expectations. Sophia stood by his side through it all, offering him support and love in a way that no one else ever had. They spent more time together, working on rebuilding their life and planning for their future. What had started as a marriage of necessity had blossomed into something real, something neither of them had expected. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, Adrian turned to Sophia. "I know things haven't been easy lately, but I've never been more certain about anything in my life. I love you, Sophia." Sophia smiled, her heart full. "I love you too, Adrian. We'll get through this together." Months passed, and slowly, Adrian and Sophia began to build a new life together. Adrian started his own company, one that focused on ethical business practices and giving back to the community, a stark contrast to the ruthless empire his father had built. Meanwhile, Sophia found her own passion in helping others. She started a foundation for families struggling with debt, inspired by her own experiences. Together, they worked as partners, building not just a business, but a life that reflected their values and their love for each other. Despite Lucas's harsh words, Adrian's mother, Margaret, had quietly reached out to him. She had always been the more compassionate of the two parents, and, though she had initially supported Lucas's decision, she missed her son. She visited Adrian and Sophia one evening, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry for everything that's happened," Margaret said, her voice soft. "I just want you to be happy." Adrian hugged his mother, grateful for her support. "I am, Mom. For the first time in a long time, I really am." In the end, Adrian and Sophia's love endured every challenge thrown their way. They had fought for each other, against all odds, and emerged stronger for it. Their life was no longer defined by debt or family expectations, but by the choices they had made together. Adrian's relationship with his father remained strained, but he had found peace in knowing that he had made the right decision for himself and for Sophia. Lucas, though still bitter, had come to begrudgingly respect his son's choice, even if he couldn't fully accept it. As for Adrian and Sophia, they continued to build their life together, one filled with love, partnership, and a deep sense of fulfillment. Their journey had been far from easy, but in the end, it had brought them closer than they ever could have imagined. And as they stood together, looking out over the horizon, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.